He opened the notebook to a page near the middle and held it up so the judge's table could see it. A date at the top. A single line of handwriting beneath. He turned to another page. Another date. Another line. He turned to another. And another. Every page the same. A date and a line, written in the same careful hand, going back years. Simon Cowell leaned forward to read them. He read one. He read a second. He sat back slowly. He pressed his hand flat over his mouth. And Simon Cowell, the man who had not been made speechless on this stage in 15 years, could not find a single word. Another Tuesday night taping. The Pasadena Civic Auditorium, packed with 3,000 people. Cameras rolling. Millions watching from home. Another hopeful contestant stepping into the spotlight. Simon Cowell sat at the judge's table in his black shirt, arms crossed. That familiar expression of patient assessment in place. He had been here enough times that very little surprised him. He was wrong about that tonight. The boy who walked out was 17 years old. His name was Theo Marsh. He was from Charlotte, North Carolina. He was tall, with his mother's cheekbones and, as the audience would come to understand, his father's eyes. He wore a dark jacket over a plain shirt, and he carried a notebook, battered. The cover soft from handling, the spine beginning to separate at the top. He held it at his side, loose in one hand, the way you carry something you have been holding for a long time and no longer notice the weight of. Terry Crews met him with a handshake. "Theo, welcome. You look like a young man with something on his mind." "I've got a few things," Theo said. The audience laughed. Theo almost smiled. "Tell us about yourself." "I'm 17. From Charlotte. I've been performing since I was 8. School plays, community theater, choir, whatever they'd let me into. Who got you started?" Theo looked down at the notebook in his hand, then back up. "My dad," he said. "He's the reason I sing." A pause that had weight to it. He passed away 14 months ago. Stroke. He was 44 years old. The audience made the sound. Sofia Vergara's hand went to her heart. Heidi Klum closed her eyes for a moment. Howie Mandel leaned forward, elbows on the table. Simon looked up from the table and did not look back down. "I'm so sorry," Terry said quietly. "Thank you." Theo adjusted the notebook in his hand. "My parents divorced when I was 5. My dad, he wasn't around much after that. Not officially. I didn't really understand why when I was little. I thought he just didn't want to be." He stopped for a moment. "He died 14 months ago, and when we went through his things, we found this." He held up the notebook. He walked to the judge's table. He set it on the edge, in front of Simon Cowell, and he opened it to a page near the middle and held it up. A date at the top, November 14th, 9 years ago. One line beneath it in a precise, unhurried hand, Charlotte Children's Theater. Back row, left side. He sang the second verse alone. I didn't know he could hold a note like that. Simon read it. His expression changed. Theo turned to another page. A date 3 months later. School winter concert, gymnasium, 3rd row from the back so his mother wouldn't see me. He bowed at the end and looked for someone. I don't know who. Another page, another date. Regional choir competition. Sat outside in the car for the first half because I was late. Heard him through the wall. Came in for the last 2 songs. Standing at the back. He placed second. He should have placed first. Page after page. Dated entries going back 9 years. Every rehearsal. Every performance. Every school show and community production and regional competition. Written in the same hand. In the same format. In a notebook that had been kept private in a drawer in an apartment in Charlotte. Until 14 months ago, when a 44-year-old man died of a stroke, and his 17-year-old son sat on the floor of that apartment, reading every page. Simon Cowell leaned forward and read one entry. He read a second. He sat back slowly. He pressed his hand flat over his mouth, and he sat there, and he couldn't find a single word. Howie Mandel was still. Completely still, hands folded, looking at the notebook. Heidi Klum's hand had gone to her face. Sofia Vergara had leaned so far forward she was barely in her chair, her eyes moving across the pages Theo was turning. Then Theo turned to the back cover. He opened it. He removed a single folded piece of paper and held it up. "There's one more thing," he said. "There's a letter in here. It's not addressed to me." He looked at Simon. "It's addressed to you." Simon Cowell did not move. To understand what that piece of paper meant, you need to understand what had happened 7 years earlier. His name was Gerald Marsh. He was 37 years old, and he lived in a one-bedroom apartment in the Belmont neighborhood of Charlotte, and he worked as a copy editor for a regional business magazine, and he was, by any external measure, an unremarkable man who had made ordinary mistakes and was living with ordinary consequences. The divorce had not been his finest hour. He had been young and selfish, and conflict-averse in the particular way that makes everything worse, and the years immediately after had been defined by the distance between what he intended to be and what he was actually managing to be. He saw Theo on alternate weekends for a while, and then less than that, and then the arrangement collapsed into something more informal, and then less frequent, and then into the specific quiet of a father who has become a stranger to his own child and does not know how to reverse it without making things worse. He did not stop thinking about Theo. He thought about him constantly. He thought about him in the way you think about something you have damaged and cannot repair, with a specific, low-grade ache that becomes the background of everything. He found out about the school play by accident. Theo was 8. Gerald heard about it from his own mother, who had heard from a neighbor. He drove to the school on a Thursday evening and sat in the back row of the auditorium and watched his son play a tree in a production of a story he didn't recognize. Theo had 4 lines. He delivered all of them with a conviction that made the row in front of Gerald turn and smile at each other. Gerald drove home and wrote the first entry in the notebook. He did not announce himself. He did not go backstage. He did not send a message. He had forfeited the right to show up in an official capacity, and he understood that and honored it. But he could still watch. Nobody could stop him from watching. He drove to Charlotte Children's Theater when Theo was 9 and stood at the back and watched the second act from the shadows. He sat in his car outside a gymnasium and listened through a wall. He stood at the edge of a school athletic field during an outdoor performance in May and watched from behind the chain-link fence because the bleacher seats were reserved for families, and he did not trust himself to sit there unchallenged. He wrote it all down. The date, the venue, the specific thing Theo had done that he wanted to remember. 1 line per entry, sometimes 2. Never more. The notebook was not a confessional. It was a record. It was the closest thing to presence he was able to give himself permission for. When Theo was 12, Gerald watched a regional choir competition from a seat in the last row of a rented church hall in Concord. Theo sang a solo in the third piece. Gerald counted 4 people in the audience who leaned toward the person next to them when Theo's voice came in. He wrote that down. He had been watching Simon Cowell's shows since Theo was 9, not out of particular devotion, but because Theo talked about them, occasionally, during the brief and careful phone calls they managed once or twice a year, and Gerald paid attention to everything Theo mentioned. He watched the auditions. He watched what Simon said to the ones who were genuinely good. He decided, somewhere around Theo's 14th year, that his son was going to stand on that stage one day. He had no evidence for this beyond the certainty of a father who had watched every single performance and understood what he was seeing. He wrote Simon Cowell a letter. He used the production company's publicly listed address. He did not expect a response. He wrote it because he needed to put it somewhere. The certainty, the pride, the particular ache of knowing what was coming and knowing he might not be there to see it from the front. He wrote, "My name is Gerald Marsh. I am the father of a boy named Theo, who is 14 years old and lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am not a part of his daily life, which is a failure I own entirely. But I watch him perform whenever I can, without his knowledge, because he is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen, and I believe he will stand on your stage one day. I don't know if you will remember this letter when he does. I just needed someone in that world to know he is coming. His voice will do the rest." He received, 3 weeks later, a brief reply from Simon Cowell's assistant. "Mr. Cowell read your letter." Gerald Marsh folded that reply and placed it inside the back cover of the notebook. He tucked it behind the last entry, which was dated 4 days before his stroke. He thought it was private. He thought it would remain unseen. He thought that was the end of the story. Until tonight. Simon Cowell stood up from the table. He did not walk around it. He did not cross to the stage. He stood exactly where he was, and he looked at Theo Marsh, and the room was so quiet, you could hear the ventilation. "May I read it?" Simon said. Theo unfolded the letter and held it out across the edge of the stage. Simon took it. He read it. He read it slowly, the way you read something that requires time, and the audience watched his face move through a sequence of expressions that his face rarely permitted in public. When he finished, he folded it carefully along its original creases. He held it for a moment. He looked at Theo. "He was right," Simon said. His voice was very quiet. "I don't remember the letter, but he was right about everything in it." A pause. "Your father saw something real." Theo's jaw moved. He held. Simon stepped around the judge's table. He crossed to the edge of the stage and he stepped up. He walked to Theo and he sat down on the front edge of the stage. Just sat. No ceremony. The way you sit when the moment calls for something human rather than something produced. He looked at Theo and he said, "Sit with me for a second." Theo sat. They sat there together on the edge of the stage for a moment, the notebook between them, and Simon opened it and read one entry aloud in the silence of the auditorium. Just one. His voice was low and steady. He read the date and the single line beneath it. He bowed at the end and looked for someone. "I don't know who. Share this story if it moved you. Subscribe so you never miss moments like these." The auditorium was gone. All of it. 3,000 people, and there was not a dry face in any direction. Sofia Vergara was crying with both hands over her eyes. Heidi Klum had her head bowed to the table. Howie Mandel sat with his face pressed into his hands and his shoulders shaking. Simon closed the notebook. He stood. He held it out to Theo, who took it and held it against his chest. Simon put his hand on Theo's shoulder for one moment. Then he stepped back. "He knew who you were looking for," Simon said. "He was just in the wrong seat." He looked at Theo steadily. "He always came. You know that now." He walked back to the table. He sat down. Theo stood at the microphone. He breathed once. Slowly, he opened his mouth. He sang a song his father had never heard him sing, one he had written in the 14 months since the notebook. A song about the specific feeling of performing for an audience when the one person you need is not in it. About scanning rows of strangers looking for a face. About learning that the face was there all along, further back, in the dark, where you couldn't see it. It was the best song he had ever written. It was the only one that mattered. His voice filled the Pasadena Civic Auditorium the way his father had always known it would. Clean, certain, built for a room this size. 3,000 people stood and did not sit back down. When the last note ended, Simon Cowell reached forward and pressed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti fell from the ceiling. Theo Marsh stood in the center of it, with a notebook held against his chest, and his eyes open, and his face turned toward the light. In the months that followed, Simon asked to keep the letter. Theo agreed. It sits now in a frame on Simon's desk, not the wall, the desk, next to one other item. A printed copy of the notebook's last entry, dated 4 days before Gerald Marsh's stroke. The entry reads, Charlotte Performing Arts Center. Understudy showcase. He wasn't supposed to go on. The lead got sick. He walked out cold and sang as if he'd been preparing for it his whole life. I suppose he has been. I am very proud of him. I think I will write him a letter. He never sent the letter. He ran out of time. Some love never makes it to the front row. It stands at the back, in the dark, writing everything down, hoping that someday the person it belongs to will find the notebook and understand that the watching was the same as being there. It was always the same as being there.